It's really good to be with you. I am also going for authentic rather than polished. Um, I want to thank John, first of all, for reminding me of the welcome I had only 2 months ago, in which I was also asked to pledge that I would work for peace. I'm a new superintendent minister. And so the interesting thing about this point in my life is that I've been working for the connectional team for 2.5 years. Before that, I was working as a district mission enabler. And I was interested to see this around because it's one of the things I was involved in. What's your church's future story? John just brought us back to, thinking about the present and the future. And for me, mission and justice and solidarity with one another has always been absolutely going together. For me, this is primarily about the church's work, calling to share the love of God in Christ with all people beyond the church, that we're not just here for ourselves, we're here to be part of God's work in the world. So I wanted to say thank you to all of the contributors today who've taught me a lot, actually, that I didn't know at all about the history of Methodism. So it's been a good day, and thank you very much for that. But also just to say thank you to each person who's contributed for the way in which there's been some recurring themes throughout the day. I think I know that wasn't planned because having talked to some of the other people at the front, I know that we didn't do much talking to each other. I guess that's the work of God amongst us, isn't it? But I wanted to think, first of all, about what's been said a lot about trust. I have got back to preaching sermons with congregations and have been really interested in how many times I've referred to something that's happening in the world and found that people had no idea about it at all. And I've been out of circuit for 9 years, and I actually think there's been quite a significant change in that from even 9 years ago, where I would have expected congregations to know what was happening around the world, to have some sense of the statistics that we've been shared today. And actually, I don't know whether it's to do with what Pippa described as narrowcasting, I think was your phrase, and mental health issues. The number of people in churches who've said to me, I cannot bear to watch the news, it's not good for my mental health. And so I am therefore preaching with people. Am I preaching with? I feel that's what it's like rather than preaching to. I'm preaching in a context where the people that I'm preaching to aren't necessarily following what's happening. And when you start to talk to people who are younger, and I'm sure lots of you do that, the distrust about who to believe and what to believe and which view to take, I think is quite marked. So that's a challenge to us all, I think. I've also been really glad to hear through the day that sense that empathy with the poor is not enough. Pippa talked about that and about the fact that structural factors are needed. I grew up myself as the product of a white mining family, granddads who were down the pits every day for long hours. And I grew up, with apologies to any Anglicans that are here, with the sense that what was good about the Methodist Church was that they were the ones that, although they had to get down into the gutter when the Anglicans went past, still believed that they were of importance to God, still believed that actually each person was of value to God. And so for me, in my own personal Methodist history, there's been a really strong sense that justice and that value of each person, which is mentioned in the Walking with Micah report, that actual sense that each person is made with dignity and with worth by God, has been really crucial to my own upbringing and my, absolutely integral with my faith, really. And I think if I had, as a girl growing up in that family, been treated differently from the boys, I might not have listened to that message. I might have thought, you hypocrites. But in actual fact, what happened to me as a girl was that in a working class environment, I was told I could do anything that the boys could do. That there was not a binary, well, you do that and you do that. It was a sense that God valued each one of us. And so growing up, I had that sense in the church and in my own family, that actually I was of value to God, just as every other person was. So that seems kind of really fundamental to me. But I've been really grateful to people who've reminded us that the church hasn't always lived that out. And the research which I did myself, not because I wanted or needed a degree, but because I really wanted to try and learn about something, was really to do with why, despite the fact that in the 1970s and 80s of my youth, the Methodist Church was talking about anti-racism, and that Sybil Phoenix began some of the first anti-racism training in the entire country, let alone in the church. Still, by my stage of life, as a Methodist minister, I experienced over and over the racism that was going on within my congregations. And I was meeting with people who had had enough and were just leaving, because actually, despite all that we said in the church about God valuing everybody, we didn't live that out. I'm not somebody that wants to talk a lot about the research, but I did bring a few books just because I thought, well, I can point them to other people's stuff. And I did want to just mention that the research that I did led to me thinking a lot about whiteness, about what it is to be a white person, and about the fact that despite having thought about anti-racism for 40 years or something, at least, I hadn't really considered what the impact of me being white had on me as a person. And so that's been a thing which I've focused on in my own work, and which we've been trying to think about as a church together. There's a book that's just come out and edited by Anthony Reddy and Carol Troop, which is called Deconstructing Whiteness, Empire and Mission. And in there, I have written just a very small little chapter, which is fairly autobiographical, because actually I was conscious that through my growing up as a Methodist, hearing about the Methodist missionary movement, everything I was trained in by what happened was that I was trained to believe that I could give to other people, that I had out of my lots, and I did have lots compared to some people, I could give to people who had nothing. It was a strong sense of connectedness with Methodism around the world, that when a Methodist missionary, lots of you will have had this experience, you go to hear a mission partner who's come back to talk, and you go to hear about all that's been done and how great it is, and you're fueled with that sense that actually we are able to give to others. And there'd been a very lack of humility and of mutuality. During the last job that I did, it was a privilege to work alongside Rachel as she was working on the Walking with Micah project. And the strategy that I was involved with trying to help the church implement is called the Justice, Dignity and Solidarity Strategy. It's basically our equality, diversity and inclusion work. I could talk about it for a long time and I won't. But the main thing I wanted to tell you was that some of the training that came out of it, yeah, so much that could be said, but some of the training that came out of it, when I was asked what did I want to put in it, I realised that if only we could just teach each other humility, that would solve it. It was sort of as basic as that, really. That if we could just learn that I am no more important than anybody else, but I am as important as everybody else, that my point of view is my point of view, that actually my perspective is my perspective, but it will not be yours. That we don't need to other each other because we are one another together. We would actually find that we would get there with this work. So I'm losing track a little bit of how long I've got. I've got quite a long time. I don't need a long time. So I just wanted to say, in response to a lot of what's been said through the day as well, that I think one of my responses is just to appreciate that sense of learning from our legacy. I have been encouraged by Methodism that it was possible to put in a memorial to conference asking for us to think about whether we should make reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, and that when that memorial went in, it was taken seriously, and that Clive Norris has done an amazing amount of work, some of which he shared with us, which wouldn't have happened had we not sort of, well, it may have happened anyway, but it's happened on behalf of Methodism. So we have these kind of mechanisms for doing that. But alongside it, in local church work, we have this problem that actually we don't necessarily learn from the past, do we? So in the Methodist way of life, which is the thing I haven't got those here, but you've seen all the stuff downstairs on the table. There's a strong emphasis on accountability. And it seems to me that out of all the things that I've heard today and out of all the things that we've been thinking about, that sense of mutuality and of being in this together is something which really does address lots of the issues that we've talked about. That when we begin to other somebody and make them an other body, rather than to be a body together, a joint body of Christ, in that sense, we get into these difficulties. I have been grateful to the prophetic witness of Methodists through the years, and somebody mentioned, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but somebody mentioned that sort of calling to be countercultural, and to be prophetic in our, not just what we say, but in our living. And through my own earlier Methodist years, I was really grateful actually to John Vincent, however much I disagreed with him about something, to Brian Rippin, who some of you will remember, to Vernon Marsh, to all sorts of Christian ministers who called us to live out our faith. I was talking to Anthony Reddy the other day, because so far there's been not much work done on the syndrome of white flight. And I think when we look back through Methodist history, and I think, Tim, it was you that mentioned about the danger, John Wesley's sermon, was that you? About the danger of excessive wealth. I didn't check with my husband I could mention this, but when he became the vice president of conference, he really wanted to have a campaign called Gush, which was going to be give up your second holiday. Because he said, actually, if people gave up their second, third, fourth, fifth holidays of the year and put that money into the work of the Methodist Church, whatever that might be, we could have had a massive change. Now, I don't know why, you'd have to ask him why he didn't do that in the end. He definitely went around talking about it. But it's the practicalities of living faith, isn't it? We have excess, a lot of us. And we're living in a world where people do not have that excess, and where the Methodist Church could have more resource and more wealth if we were to give more. And I think, again, Tim, it was you that said we missed out the giving in Wesley's thing about saving, earning and saving. So I think there's a challenge to me anyway about how we live out our faith by deciding not to move out of the areas which most white people were moving out of. We've had a really interesting Methodist life in the UK. At one point, I thought I was called to be a missionary abroad, and somebody told me that we needed missionaries here more. And actually, my life has mainly been, well, it's all been in England, and it's mainly been working with people from around the world in such a way that it's made me just see what life is like and to be sharing that with people. And in the end, it's kind of led to a sense where I have Jewish in-laws, I have Muslim in-laws, and I have Hindu in-laws. And the shalom and the salam and the peace, which, John referred to, in actual fact, where we are together in this, I believe that's where God calls us to be together in what's happening. So I think that was most of the response I had to say. And when I veered off to Methodist way of life and lost my way, it was because I was going to say that within the Methodist way of life, there is a really strong sense that we need to be accountable again to one another. And if you've been following the Methodist way of life, the idea of small groups where we are accountable to one another, I think, has been a Methodist characteristic, and it's one we are being recalled to. But my warning about it is that it would be so easy for us to be called into accountability groups with people who are like us. And I think it seems to me that in today's era, that's where Methodism needs to be careful, to take care that we're not just accountable to people like ourselves. We are accountable to one another across all of our differences, or we forfeit, I think, our Methodist heritage. So that was all I wanted to say.